Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Dust clawed at Mark Rylance's throat like broken glass. His boots slammed against rusted plating, each step a gamble on metal that could collapse into nothing. The starport had been dead for decades, skeletal ribs of landing platforms jutting from sand, cargo containers split open like rotted fruit. Behind him, voices barked in Qatar, guttural and sharp, closing the distance. The map tube was slick with sweat in his palm. He gripped it tighter, feeling the worn leather crack under his fingers. His lungs screamed. The air here was wrong, too thin, laced with chemicals from whatever had killed this place. Every breath tasted like metal and ash. A cable snapped under his boot. He went down hard, hip slamming into jagged steel. The tube flew from his hand, tumbling end over end through the skeletal framework. He watched it fall, watched it hit, watched it split open. The map spilled out, hand-drawn, ink on salvaged cloth. The only copy. It caught the wind, fluttering like something alive, then slapped down into a puddle of oily water that had collected in a depression between broken plates. The ink began to bleed immediately, routes dissolving into dark smears. The path to the refuge, the tunnels, the children. Mark's body locked. His hands were already moving to rise, to sprint back, to grab it. A plasma bolt scorched the air 2 meters from his head. Metal screamed as it superheated, throwing sparks. He ran. His legs carried him through the maze of wreckage while his mind stayed behind, watching the map sink into filth. The shouts grew fainter. His throat was raw. He didn't stop until the starport was a distant silhouette against red sky, until the desert swallowed him in its vastness. He collapsed behind an outcropping of black stone, chest heaving, vision swimming. The map. Jesus Christ, the map. He'd promised them. He'd sworn he'd keep it safe. The children, 43 of them, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, hidden in the refuge's deepest chambers. The only exit route marked on that map. The only way through the collapsed sectors without hitting dead ends or cave-ins. His hands were shaking so hard he had to press them against the stone to make them stop. The shame hit him then, hotter than the twin furnaces of the suns overhead. He'd run. He'd left it there, bleeding into oil and sand, while children waited in the dark. Hours crawled past. The heat peaked, then began its slow descent toward the brief, violent dusk of this world. Mark forced himself to move, following ridgelines and gullies he'd memorized on supply runs. The refuge was 30 kilometers from the starport. On foot, in this terrain, it would take most of the night. He made it in 5 hours. The entrance was invisible unless you knew, a split in layered rock that looked like natural erosion, leading down into a network of caves and abandoned maintenance tunnels from the colony's first attempt at settlement. Before the wars, before the Qatar claimed this region and drove humanity underground. Mark squeezed through the narrow gap, feeling stone scrape his shoulders. The temperature dropped immediately. He descended in darkness, one hand on the rough wall, counting steps. At 200, the tunnel opened into the first chamber. Lanterns burned low, casting oil smoke shadows. Faces turned toward him, gaunt, exhausted. These were the remnants, the ones who'd survived the raids, the ones who'd fled burning settlements, the ones with nowhere left to go. No one spoke to him. No one had to. He was human. They were mostly human, but he was also the outsider, the traitor who'd stumbled into their war 6 months ago, the one Lyra barely tolerated because he brought medicine and water purifiers from the neutral zones. He moved deeper into the complex, through chambers carved from living rock, past families huddled around cookfires, past guards who watched him with flat, suspicious eyes. The air smelled of bodies and smoke, and the mineral tang of deep earth. He found his alcove, a depression in the wall barely wide enough for a bedroll, and collapsed. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the map fluttering, falling, drowning. He was still awake when she found him. The sound came first, boot steps, heavy and deliberate. Then her shadow fell across his face, blocking the distant lantern light. Lyra. She was massive. 2.5 meters of corded muscle and blue-tinted skin, her people's adaptation to a world with harsher radiation than Earth. Scars traced her arms in languages of violence, The greatsword was strapped across her back, its wrapped handle visible over her shoulder. Her hand shot out and closed around his shirt. She hauled him up and slammed him against the stone wall hard enough to crack his skull if she'd wanted. Instead, she just held him there, pinned, her other hand pressing against his throat. Not choking him, not yet, just letting him feel how easily she could. Her face was centimeters from his. Her eyes were gold, actually gold, with vertical pupils that contracted to slits in the low light. "My scouts found your map." Her voice was iron dragged across stone. "In the starport, in the mud, with Qatar patrol standing over it." Mark's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "They're coming." She leaned closer. Her breath was hot against his face. "You betrayed us." "I didn't." The words choked off as her hand tightened fractionally. "You ran. You dropped it and ran. They have the routes now. They have the tunnel markers. They know where the children are." "It was an accident," he gasped. "They were shooting. I fell." "An accident." She repeated the word like it was something poisonous. "The children will die because of your accident." Behind her, others had gathered. He could see them in the shadows, watching, waiting to see what she'd do. "How long?" Mark forced the words out. "How long until they get here?" "My scouts counted 30, full assault gear. They were already moving when we pulled back." She released him and he sagged against the wall. "Dawn. Maybe sooner if they push hard." 6 hours. Maybe less. Lyra stepped back, her hand dropping to the wrapped handle of her sword. For a moment he thought she'd draw it, thought this was how it ended. Quick and clean, payment for his failure. Instead, she just looked at him with something worse than hate. Disgust. Disappointment. "You brought death to my people," she said quietly. "I should kill you now." "Why don't you?" "Because I need every fighter, and you at least know how to hold a rifle." She turned away. "Get armed. We have barricades to build." She walked into the darkness, her shadow consuming the lantern light. Mark slid down the wall until he was sitting, head in his hands. Around him the others dispersed, their whispers carrying judgment he didn't need to hear to understand. The map lay in the mud. So did his honor. The war room was a natural cavern that had been expanded with cutting tools and explosives, its walls covered in faded maps and diagrams. A single table dominated the center, just a sheet of salvaged metal on stacked stones, and Lyra stood over it like a general before a siege. Mark entered to find her surrounded by her inner circle. 5 fighters, all from her people, all blue-skinned and scarred and looking at him like he was something that had crawled up from the waste pits. On the table was a tunnel diagram, scratched into the metal surface with a blade. Fresh, crude, nothing like the detailed map he'd lost. "They'll come through here." Lyra's finger traced the main entrance passage. "It's the only approach wide enough for their gear." Mark stepped forward. "The maintenance shafts." "No. They're narrow enough. The children could—" "I said no." Her eyes cut to him. "We hold here. You'll die here. Then we die." The silence cracked between them like voltage. "This is insane," Mark said. His voice was rising, losing the careful neutrality he'd maintained for months. "You're going to get them all killed for— what? Pride? Stone?" Lyra moved around the table, fast. She didn't touch him, but her presence alone forced him back a step. "You think you understand?" Her voice was quiet, deadly. "You who ran. You who dropped the only thing we trusted you with? I'm trying to save them. You're trying to save yourself." She leaned in. "You want us to run so you don't have to watch what your cowardice brought down on us." Mark's face burned. "I'm trying to give them a chance. They don't need chances from you. They need you to shut up and do what you're told for once in your miserable life." One of the fighters, Kesh, built like a wall, laughed. A short, ugly sound. "This is our home," Lyra said, each word precise, cutting. "We don't run because a traitor got scared and dropped a map. Your home will be your grave. Better than living as cowards." The word hung there. Coward. She'd finally said it, finally named what everyone had been thinking since he'd stumbled back into the refuge empty-handed. Mark felt something break inside him. Some last piece of dignity or hope or whatever had been keeping him upright. "Fine," he said. "Die for your stone. I'll die with you. At least then I won't have to see their faces when... Get out! Lyra's hand was on her sword handle. Before I change my mind about needing every fighter. He left. The tunnels seemed darker somehow. Tighter. He wound his way deeper into the complex, past sleeping chambers and storage alcoves, following the sound of whispers and muffled crying. The children's chamber was the safest place in the refuge, deepest, furthest from any entrance. It was also the most trapped. 43 children sat or lay on bedrolls and salvaged blankets. The youngest was maybe 3, the oldest was 15, a girl named Sarah, who'd taken on the role of keeping order. She looked up when Mark entered, her face exhausted beyond her years. "They're scared," she whispered. "They can hear the adults talking. They know something's wrong." Mark knelt beside the nearest group. 5 kids clustered together, wide-eyed in the lantern light. The smallest, a boy with blue-tinted skin and a gap where his front teeth should be, was crying silently, tears tracking down his dust-smeared face. Mark reached into his pack and pulled out the last thing he'd saved, a piece of salvaged cloth, clean and white. He spread it on the stone floor between them. "Let me show you something," he said quietly. He had a piece of charcoal in his pocket. He'd been using it to mark supply crates. Now he used it to draw. Simple lines at first, then more complex shapes. A landscape that existed nowhere but in his imagination. "Here," he traced an ocean with his finger. "The water is so blue it hurts to look at. And here, mountains rising. Flying whales sing songs that light the stars at night." Small hands reached out to touch the drawing. Someone asked if the whales were scary. "No," Mark said. "They're gentle. They let children ride on their backs." "Can we go there?" This from the boy with missing teeth. Mark's throat closed. "Someday, maybe." More children crowded around. He kept drawing, kept inventing. A world with cities that floated on clouds. Forests where the trees grew fruit that tasted like sunshine. Rivers that sparkled with something other than industrial runoff. For a few minutes, the fear loosened. Someone laughed. Another asked a question. The smallest boy stopped crying and leaned against Mark's shoulder. From the chamber entrance, unnoticed, Lyra watched. She'd come to check on them, to make sure they were settled before she gave the order to start building barricades. She'd expected chaos, expected fear, expected to have to be the strong one, the protector, the one who lied and said everything would be fine. Instead, she found the man she'd called a coward giving her children laughter. She watched him divide his last ration bar among the smallest ones, watched him wipe tears and answer questions with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so weak. Someone who'd run and left them all to die. Her hand found the handle of her sword and gripped it until her knuckles went pale. Then the first explosion hit. The chamber shook. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in sheets. Lanterns swung on their hooks, throwing wild shadows. The laughter snapped into screaming. Mark was already moving, pulling children away from the walls, shouting for them to get to the center of the room. Lyra pushed through the chaos to Sarah. "Keep them here," she commanded. "Don't let anyone leave this chamber." Sarah nodded, her face white with terror, but set with determination. Lyra turned and ran. The tunnels were chaos. People running, shouting, grabbing weapons. Another explosion, closer this time. The refuge's ancient structure groaned under the assault. She reached the main passage to find Kesh already there, his rifle raised, peering into the darkness beyond the entrance. "Report! Breaching charges!" he shouted over the ringing in their ears. "They're not waiting for dawn. They're coming now." A third explosion. This one blew out the reinforced barrier they'd built across the main entrance. Scrap metal and stone that had taken weeks to construct. It disintegrated into shrapnel and debris. Through the smoke and dust, shadows moved. The Qatar surged forward. They were bipedal but hunched, their skin mottled gray and black, armored with plates that were part natural, part grafted technology. They moved fast, weapons firing in coordinated bursts. Plasma rounds lit the tunnel in strobing flashes of blue-white. Lyra's sword rang as she drew it. "Hold them here," she roared. "Not one step further." The defenders formed a ragged line. Rifles cracked. Plasma screamed. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening. Lyra charged. Her sword was a relic, forged on her homeworld before the Exodus. Before the wars that had scattered her people across hostile stars, it was pure folded steel, no tech, no enhancements, just perfectly balanced death in her hands. She carved through the first Qatar attacker with a diagonal slash that opened it from shoulder to hip. Black blood sprayed. The creature went down shrieking. Two more came at her from the sides. She spun, the blades singing. One lost its head. The other took the sword point through its throat and collapsed gurgling. Behind her, the defenders were giving ground. There were too many. The Qatar pushed forward in waves, overwhelming through sheer numbers. Kesh went down with a plasma round through his leg. He kept firing from the ground, cursing, until another round caught him in the chest and he stopped moving. Lyra killed another attacker, and another. Her arms were screaming, her breath coming in ragged gas. The narrow passage was working in their favor. The Qatar couldn't bring their numbers to bear all at once, but it wouldn't be enough. A plasma round caught her in the shoulder. White fire, burning. She felt the flesh cook, smelled it. The sword slipped in her grip. She staggered. Another round hit her thigh. Her leg went out. She dropped to her knees, steel clanging against stone. Blood ran down her arm. Dark blue, almost black in the flickering light. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The Qatar advanced. She tried to raise the sword. Her arm wouldn't respond. Then Mark was there. He came out of the smoke like something possessed. No weapon, just hands grabbing her under the arms and dragging her backward. Plasma rounds stitched the air where she'd been kneeling. He hauled her behind the broken barricade, her boots scraping stone. She tried to stand. Couldn't. Her shoulder was a mass of seared meat and charred cloth. Mark was tearing at his shirt. His hands shook so badly the fabric kept slipping from his fingers. He ripped the sleeve free, the sound of tearing cloth loud despite the chaos. "Hold still," he gasped. "Just hold still." He pressed the cloth against her shoulder. She made a sound she'd never made before, somewhere between a scream and a growl. He pressed harder, binding the wound. Her blood soaked into the pale fabric immediately, dark blue spreading like ink, hot and slick. His hands were shaking, trembling so hard she could feel it through the pressure. But they were gentle, careful. He tied the makeshift bandage tight, then tore another strip from his shirt for her thigh. The fabric was already saturated, heavy with her blood. Their eyes met. They were close, close enough that she could see the fear in his face, the desperation, close enough to see the dirt smeared across his cheek, the sweat cutting tracks through the grime. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, but they kept working, kept binding, kept holding her together. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She almost couldn't hear him over the sound of fighting. "God, I'm so sorry." She wanted to say something, wanted to curse him or thank him or tell him to run, save himself. Instead, she just breathed, ragged and harsh, while his trembling hands pressed the knot tight against her wounds. The torn fabric stood out stark against her blue skin, already dark with blood. For the first time since he'd arrived at the refuge, she didn't see a coward. She saw a man holding her life in his bare hands. The fighting was moving deeper into the complex. The remaining defenders had fallen back to the next defensive position. They were buying time, but time for what? There was nowhere left to run. Mark helped her sit up against the wall. Her sword lay on the ground beside her, blood slicked and heavy. The torn bandage on her shoulder was already soaking through. "Can you walk?" he asked. She tried. Got one foot under her, pushed up. Her leg gave out immediately. She would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We need to—" A child's scream cut through the chaos. They both froze. The scream came again, high and terrified, from deeper in the tunnels, from the direction of the children's chamber. "No," Lyra breathed. "They can't have—" Mark was already moving. He grabbed her sword from the ground. It took both his hands to lift it and started running toward the screaming. "Wait!" Lyra tried to follow, managed 3 steps before her leg collapsed again. "You can't fight them. You don't know how to use that." He didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran into the darkness, carrying a sword he could barely lift, toward enemies that would tear him apart. Lyra dragged herself after him, using the wall for support, leaving a trail of dark blood on stone. The makeshift bandage pulled with every movement, sending white sparks through her vision. The children's chamber had become a trap. A Qatar patrol had found a secondary tunnel, one of the maintenance shafts Mark had tried to use as an escape route. They'd broken through into the chamber from above, dropping through a collapsed section of ceiling. Sarah had placed herself between the attackers and the younger children. She had a knife. It looked like a toy in her hand. The Qatar advanced slowly, weapons raised, making clicking sounds that might have been communication or might have been laughter. Mark burst into the chamber and everything stopped. He couldn't lift the sword properly. It dragged on the ground, the point scraping stone, but he held it in front of him, two-handed, shaking so hard the blade vibrated. "Get away from them," he said. The Qatar turned. There were 3 of them. They looked at him, at the sword, at his obvious incompetence, and made those clicking sounds again. Definitely laughter. One raised its weapon. Mark charged. He had no technique, no training. He just ran forward, screaming, swinging the sword in a wild arc. It connected with the first Qatar's weapon, knocking it aside. The sword's momentum carried it around and down, and more through luck than skill, it caught the creature across its armored chest. The blade bit deep. Black blood sprayed. The Qatar went down. The other 2 opened fire. Mark dove and the sword flew from his hands. Plasma rounds scorched the air above him. He hit the ground hard, rolled, came up empty-handed. A Qatar loomed over him, weapon aimed at his head. Lyra's sword took it through the back. She crawled into the chamber, dragging herself across stone, her wounded leg useless behind her. The torn bandage on her shoulder was dark and sodden, but it held. She'd grabbed the sword where Mark dropped it and thrust upward with the last of her strength. The Qatar collapsed, the blade buried to the hilt. The 3rd attacker turned its weapon on her. Sarah's knife took it in the eye. The 15-year-old girl had moved without hesitation, without thought. Just seen the opening and struck. The Qatar stumbled backward, shrieking, clawing at its face. Mark grabbed a fallen rifle, burned his hand on the overheated barrel, and fired point blank. The Qatar's shrieking stopped. Silence. Mark dropped the rifle and fell to his knees beside Lyra. She was trying to sit up, failing. The bandages he'd tied were soaked through, dark blue blood seeping between the torn fabric. She'd lost too much blood. "The children," she gasped. "Get them out. The shaft, the one they fell through. It leads up, to the surface, north side of the complex. I'm not leaving you. You have to." She grabbed his arm. Her grip was weak. "They need someone. They trust you. They trust you. I can't walk." She said it flatly. Fact, absolute. "You can. So go." From deeper in the tunnels, more sounds, more fighting, more screaming. The Qatar were pushing through, overwhelming the last defensive positions. "They're coming," Sarah said quietly. She stood over them, the knife still in her hand, blood dripping from its tip. "We need to move now." Mark looked at the children huddled against the far wall. 43 pairs of eyes wide with terror. The smallest boy, the one with a gap in his teeth, was crying again. Silent tears. He looked at Lyra, at the sword still buried in Qatar flesh, at the blood-soaked bandage on her shoulder, the pale fabric from his shirt now dark and heavy, at the blood pooling beneath her. "How many can fit in that shaft?" he asked. "All of them," Lyra said. "It's tight, but they're small. Adults won't fit, just the children." "And you?" Her laugh was bitter. "I'll hold them here." The sounds were getting closer. Boots on stone, weapons fire. The Qatar were systematically clearing every chamber, every alcove. They'd be here in minutes. Mark stood. His hands were still shaking, still covered in her blood, both red and blue mixed together. He looked at the children, then at Sarah. "Can you lead them?" he asked the girl. "Through the shaft and out?" "North side. There's a ravine about half a kilometer from the exit. If you follow it east, it'll take you to the neutral zone. 3 days walk." Sarah nodded. "What about you?" "I stay with her." The words came out steady despite everything. "Buy you time to get clear." "You can barely fight," Lyra said. "Neither can you." He met her eyes. "I stay." For a long moment they just stared at each other. Blood and dirt and the absolute certainty of death in the spaces between heartbeats. Then Lyra reached up, found the buckle at her chest, the clasp that held the sword's harness in place. Her fingers fumbled with it, weak and clumsy from blood loss. "Help me," she whispered. Mark knelt and undid the buckle. The leather harness came free, and she shrugged out of it with a gasp of pain. The great sword's scabbard lay on the ground between them, empty now, the blade still buried in Qatar flesh across the chamber. "Pull it out," she said. He crossed to the dead Qatar and grabbed the sword's handle. It took all his strength to wrench it free. Black blood ran down the blade, pooling on stone. He carried it back, dragged it, really, the point scraping, and started to lay it at her feet. "No," Lyra said. Her voice was stronger now, certain. "Not yet. Bring them here. All of them." Mark didn't understand, but he obeyed. He nodded to Sarah. "Everyone gather here," Sarah said quietly. "Now." The children moved like ghosts, silent and terrified. They pressed in close, forming a half circle around Lyra and Mark. The youngest ones in front, the older ones behind. 43 pairs of eyes watching, waiting. Lyra looked at them, at faces she'd known since birth, faces she'd protected, faces she'd promised would see tomorrow. The blood-soaked bandage on her shoulder stood out stark against her blue skin, a reminder of what Mark had done, what he'd tried to do. She looked at Mark, at the man who dropped the map, who'd run, who'd come back anyway, bleeding and terrified and holding her life in his hands. She picked up the sword. It took both her hands and all her remaining strength and extended it toward him. Her voice rose clear and strong despite the blood loss, despite the pain. Loud enough for every child to hear, loud enough to carry, "Take my sword and never know death." The words echoed off stone. Ancient words, sacred words, the blessing of her people, spoken when a warrior passed their blade to the next generation. Mark's hands closed around the handle. The children watched, silent, absolute, witnesses to something they were too young to understand but would remember forever. "Sarah," Lyra said, "you saw this?" "Yes." The girl's voice was steady. "Remember it. Remember that I chose him, that I gave him our blade, our words, our trust." Lyra's eyes swept across the children. "Remember that he earned it." The weight was impossible in Mark's hands. The blade was longer than he was tall, forged for someone with her strength, her reach. In his hands it was absurd, a tool he could never master, a weapon he had no right to carry. But he took it, in front of 43 children and a girl who'd killed without hesitation, in front of Lyra, who'd given him everything. "Go," Lyra said. She was fading now, her voice thinning. "Get them out. Live." Mark wanted to say something, wanted to find words that could possibly match this moment. Instead, he just nodded. He turned to the children. "Everyone up," he said, and his voice didn't shake. "Sarah's going to lead you out. Stay quiet. Stay together. Don't look back." They moved like ghosts, silent and terrified. Sarah helped the smallest ones climb up through the collapsed section of ceiling, the shaft that led up and out. One by one, they disappeared into darkness. The boy with the gap in his teeth was last. He looked at Mark, then at Lyra. "Are you coming?" he asked. "Soon," Mark lied. "Go on. Sarah's waiting." The boy climbed up and was gone. Mark picked up the fallen Qatar rifle. 3 of them now scattered around the chamber. He checked their charges. 2 were nearly empty. The third had maybe 20 shots left. He positioned himself in the doorway. He laid the sword on the ground at his feet. He couldn't possibly wield it and fire a rifle at the same time. But having it there felt important, felt like carrying something larger than himself. The blood-soaked bandage on Lyra's shoulder caught his eye. Pale fabric from his shirt, now dark with her blood. A piece of him wrapped around her, holding her together even as she fell apart. "Mark," Lyra said. He looked back. "Make it count." "I will." The first Qatar entered the chamber. Mark opened fire. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The first Qatar went down, its face exploding in black blood and bone. 2 more pushed through, and he fired until the rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and grabbed another, firing before they could get their weapons up. 1 fell. The other got a shot off that scorched past his head and melted a section of wall. Mark dove, rolled, came up firing. The Qatar collapsed. 4 dead. 19 rounds left. More came. They learned quickly, using the doorway for cover, firing around the edges. Plasma rounds lit the chamber, turning it into a strobing hell of light and shadow. Mark ducked behind a stone outcropping and returned fire. Killed another. 14 rounds left. They rushed him. 3 at once, coordinated. He dropped 2, and the third was on him before he could adjust aim. It slammed into him, and they went down in a tangle. Its claws raked his chest. Its breath was hot and chemical. Mark jammed the rifle barrel under its chin and pulled the trigger. The Qatar's head vaporized. He shoved the corpse off and staggered to his feet. His chest was on fire, blood running down his stomach. The rifle was ruined, melted by point-blank plasma discharge. 8 rounds left in the last rifle. He picked it up with hands that could barely grip, braced himself against the wall, and waited. They came. He made every shot count. Headshots, center mass, efficient, cold. He'd never been a fighter, never been a soldier, but desperation makes teachers of us all. The last rifle clicked empty on a chamber full of corpses. Mark dropped it and reached for the sword. Behind him, Lyra watched. The blood-soaked bandage on her shoulder had loosened, hanging by threads. But it had held long enough, had kept her conscious long enough to see him fight, to see him stand. He couldn't lift the sword properly. His arms were shaking, his chest screaming where the Qatar had torn him open. The blade scraped on stone as he dragged it into position. 2 more Qatar entered the chamber. Mark charged. It was suicide. It was stupid. It was all he had left. The sword was too heavy, too long, too impossible. He swung it like a club, both hands on the grip, putting his entire body into the motion. It caught the first Qatar across the midsection and cut clean through. The second one raised its weapon. Mark couldn't get the sword around in time, couldn't block, couldn't dodge. A plasma round took the Qatar in the back. It fell forward, dead before it hit the ground. In the doorway, Lyra braced herself against the frame. She held a fallen Qatar weapon in her hands, smoke rising from its barrel. Her face was bone white, her eyes glassy with blood loss. The bandage had come completely loose now, trailing from her shoulder like a banner. Pale fabric soaked dark blue, marked with her blood and his effort. She'd crawled across the entire chamber, leaving a smear of dark blood on stone, just to fire one shot. "They're clear," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The children. They're clear. I heard them. On the surface." Mark took a step toward her, stopped. The sounds were everywhere now, not just from one direction, but all directions. The Qatar had breached every defensive position, flooded every tunnel. They were converging on this chamber, drawn by the sound of fighting. He had seconds, maybe less. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." She smiled, and it was terrible. Beautiful and broken and absolutely defiant. Tell them we held." "I will." "And Mark?" "Yeah? You weren't a coward. Not when it mattered." Her eyes closed. The weapon fell from her hands. The Qatar were at the entrance now. Multiple contacts. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. Mark couldn't win. Couldn't even slow them down for long. But the children were clear. They'd made it to the surface. Sarah would lead them east, toward the neutral zone, toward something that might be hope. He raised the sword. Too heavy. Too impossible. His. The Qatar entered, and Lyra laughed. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere they could never reach. A raw, defiant sound that echoed off stone, louder than their war cries, louder than the weapons fire that had torn through the refuge. It was the sound of someone who'd saved what mattered and could let go of everything else. It was her last breath. Mark stood alone in the doorway, sword raised, her laughter still ringing in his ears. The Qatar surged forward. He charged to meet them. The Qatar kept coming. Mark fought like something possessed, the sword impossibly heavy in his hands. He had no technique, no skill, just desperate swings and the memory of her laugh driving him forward. He killed 3, 5, lost count. His arms were numb, his vision tunneling. A plasma round caught him in the side. White fire. He went down. Through the smoke and pain, he saw the tunnel behind the Qatar. Saw it empty. They'd all converged here. On this chamber, drawn by the fighting, left the other passages clear. The children were gone. Safe. Clear. He'd done it. They'd done it. Mark tried to rise, couldn't. His body wouldn't respond anymore. The sword lay beside him, blood slicked and impossible. A guitar loomed over him, weapon raised. He closed his eyes and heard Lyra's laugh, defiant and unbroken, echoing through stone. Then darkness. He woke to cold air and stars. Someone was dragging him, multiple someones, voices in a language he didn't recognize. Blue-skinned faces, survivors from the refuge, the few who'd made it out through secondary tunnels. They'd come back for him, found him in the ruins, somehow still breathing. The sword was still with him. Someone had strapped it across his back. "The children?" he croaked. "Safe," a voice said. "Your girl, Sarah. She led them out. They made it." Mark let his eyes close. The pain was distant now, muted by shock and blood loss. But beneath it was something else, something that felt almost like peace. They carried him through the night, across hostile terrain, through ravines and across sand. He drifted in and out, seeing Lyra's face, hearing her laugh, feeling the weight of the sword on his back. When dawn came, they crested a rise and saw lights in the distance. The neutral zone. The settlement was a collection of prefab structures and salvaged shelters clustered around an old mining operation. It wasn't much, but it was something other than running. The survivors carried Mark through the perimeter. Guards challenged them, weapons raised, until someone recognized the sword on his back. "Casenth blade," one of the guards whispered. "Where did he get that?" "From its owner," one of the survivors said, "who died so we could live." They took him to a medical shelter, laid him on a cot. Someone started cutting away his shredded clothes, cataloging his wounds. Too many. Too deep. He should have died in that chamber. Maybe he had. A woman entered, face hidden behind a scarf and goggles. She dismissed the others, waited until they were alone. "Mark Rylance?" she asked. He nodded barely. "I'm Administrator Aaron. This is my settlement." She pulled down the scarf. Her face was scarred, weathered. "Your children are here. 43 of them, all alive." "Not mine," he whispered. "No?" She gestured to someone outside. "Then whose?" The door opened. Children flooded in. All 43, clean and fed and alive. They crowded around his cot, careful not to touch his wounds but needing to be close. Finn pushed to the front, the boy with the gap in his teeth. He was holding something, pale fabric, torn and stained dark blue. The bandage, Lyra's bandage. "We found it," Finn said quietly. "In the tunnel. When we were climbing out, it was on the ground." Mark stared at it. The piece of his shirt he'd torn free with shaking hands. The fabric he'd pressed against her wounds, soaked with her blood. The last thing he'd given her before she'd given him everything. "It's hers," Finn said, "and yours. So we brought it." Sarah stepped forward. She had something too, the sword's harness, which she'd somehow retrieved. She laid it beside him on the cot. "She gave you the blade," Sarah said, "in front of all of us, made us witness it, made sure we'd remember." She touched the bandage in Finn's hands. "This belongs with it. Proof that you bled for us too." Mark reached out with a trembling hand and took the bandage. It was stiff with dried blood, the fabric dark and heavy. He pressed it to his chest, feeling the weight of it. Administrator Aaron watched this in silence. Then, "That blade is worth more than this entire settlement. Pre-war Casenth steel. Pure. You could sell it. Buy passage off-world. Start over somewhere safe." Mark looked at the children, at Sarah with her knowing eyes, at Finn clutching his hand, at 43 faces that had trusted him when he didn't deserve it. He looked at the sword lying beside him, the harness, the blood-soaked bandage. "No," he said. His voice was stronger now. "I keep it." "Why?" "Because I promised." "Who?" "The woman who died giving it to me. The woman who laughed at death because she'd already won." He met Aaron's eyes. Her name was Lyra, and she trusted me with more than steel. Aaron was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "The children can stay here. We'll find space. Food. They'll be safe." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The Qatar will be looking for them. For you. This isn't over." "I know. Can you fight? Really fight, not just survive?" Mark thought about the chamber. about swinging a sword too heavy for him, about Lyra's laugh echoing through stone as death closed in. "I'll learn," he said. Aaron smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Then you'll fit right in." She left. The children stayed, pressing close, needing his presence even though he was broken and bleeding. Finn still held his hand. Sarah watched from the doorway, the bloody knife still in her belt. Mark closed his eyes and felt the weight of the sword beside him, felt the bandage pressed against his chest, pale fabric soaked dark with her blood, marked with his trembling hands. A visual contract, a promise written in blood and torn cloth and impossible steel. He would keep it. Days passed. Mark's wounds began to heal, though the fever came and went. The settlement's medics did what they could with limited supplies. Infection took hold in his side, the wound from the scavenger's rusted metal. For 3 days he burned, hallucinating, seeing Lyra standing at the foot of his cot telling him to get up. On the 4th day, the fever broke. He woke to find Sarah sitting beside him, changing his bandages. "You're awake," she said. "Good. The little ones have been asking." "How long?" 6 days since we arrived. 8 since the refuge fell. She finished wrapping his side. "You talk in your sleep. Call out for her." "Lyra?" "Yeah." Sarah's hands stilled. "What was she like? Before?" Mark thought about it. About the woman who'd slammed him against walls and called him a coward, who'd stood alone against impossible odds, who'd laughed at death because she'd saved what mattered. "Strong," he said finally. "Uncompromising. She didn't have patience for weakness or excuses." "Sounds terrible." "She was." Mark smiled despite the pain. "And she was the best of us." Sarah was quiet. Then, the others, the survivors who made it out, they're telling stories about how you held the chamber, how you bought them time to escape. "That was Lyra." "No, that was both of you." She met his eyes. "She gave you the sword in front of all of us for a reason, made it public, made it witnessed. You know what that means in her culture?" Mark shook his head. "It means your clan now, family. It means her honor is your honor, her debts are your debts, her people are your people." Sarah touched the bandage wrapped around his side. "Those 43 children, they're your responsibility now." She made sure of it. The weight of that settled on Mark like atmosphere. 43 lives, 43 futures, all depending on a man who dropped a map and run. "I don't know how," he said quietly. "Neither did she. Not at first." Sarah stood. "But she learned, and so will you." She left him alone with his thoughts and his wounds, and the sword lying beside his cot. The harness was there too, and wrapped around its grip. Carefully, reverently, was the blood-soaked bandage. Pale fabric marked dark blue. His shirt, her blood, their contract. Mark reached out and touched it. The fabric was stiff, dry, but the meaning was still there, written in every fiber. She'd trusted him, had bound her wounds with his cloth and then bound him with her steel, had made him witness and warrior and guardian in front of everyone who mattered, had laughed at death because she'd already won. He would honor that, would carry her sword and her trust and her defiant laughter forward into whatever came next. For the children, for her memory, for the promise written in blood and torn cloth. 2 weeks after the fall of the refuge, Mark was cleared to walk. His wounds were healing, slowly, painfully, but healing. The settlement's doctor said he was lucky. The infection should have killed him. The blood loss should have killed him. The sheer number of wounds should have killed him. But he was still breathing. He found Administrator Erin in what passed for her office, a prefab structure with maps covering every surface. She looked up when he entered. "You're up," she said. "Good. We need to talk." Mark sat carefully, his side pulling. About what happens next." She gestured to the maps. "The Qatar are pushing into this region. Hard. 3 settlements have fallen in the last week. We're next if we don't do something." "What can we do?" "Fight, organize, stop running." She looked at him. "The children you brought, they're telling stories about the refuge, about how you stood when everyone else fell, about the sword." "That wasn't me. That was Lyra. I know. They talk about her too." Aaron leaned forward. But she's dead, and you're alive, and you're carrying her blade. That means something to people, especially to the Casenth survivors scattered across this zone. Mark understood. You want me to be a symbol. I want you to be a fighter. The symbol comes free. She tapped the map. There are others like you, refugees, survivors, people with nothing left to lose. If we organize them, train them, maybe we stand a chance. I don't know how to lead. Neither did Lyra, not at first. Erin's eyes were sharp. But she learned, and she chose you to carry on after her. So either she was a fool, or she saw something worth saving. Mark thought about the map fluttering into mud, about running while children waited in the dark, about all the ways he'd failed before he'd learned to stand. She was no fool, he said quietly. Then prove it. Erin stood. Training starts tomorrow. Anyone who wants to learn to fight, we teach them. Anyone who wants to survive what's coming, we give them the tools. She walked to the door, then paused. The children are waiting outside. They want to see you. Mark rose carefully and followed her out. The children were gathered in the dusty square between prefabs, all 43, plus a few others who'd attached themselves to the group. Finn was in front, as always. When they saw Mark, they surged forward, not touching. His wounds were still too fresh, but surrounding him with their presence. You're better, Finn said. It wasn't quite a question. Getting there. Good. The boy's face was serious. Because we've been practicing. Practicing what? Sarah stepped forward. She had the bloody knife in her belt still, but now she also had something else. A length of pipe wrapped in cloth, fashioned into a crude sword. Fighting, she said. We're not running anymore. We're not being helpless. So we're learning. Mark looked at the children, saw determination in faces too young to hold it, saw the same defiance he'd seen in Lyra's eyes before the end. Who's teaching you? We are, Sarah said. Teaching each other. The ones who know anything teaching the ones who don't. She gestured to the pipe sword. It's not much, but it's something. Mark thought about Lyra, standing in the war room, refusing to run. Thought about her laugh, defiant in the face of death. Thought about 43 children choosing to fight rather than hide. Tomorrow, he said, we start real training. All of you. Anyone who wants to learn. Even the little ones? Finn asked. Mark looked at the boy, 6 years old, gap in his teeth, holding a piece of sharpened metal like it was a lifeline. Especially the little ones, Mark said, because you deserve to know how to protect yourselves. That night, Mark sat alone in his assigned shelter. The sword lay across his knees, the harness beside it. The blood-soaked bandage was wrapped around the grip now, tied there by Sarah's careful hands. He ran his fingers over the fabric, felt the stiffness of dried blood, felt the weight of everything it represented. Lyra had given him this, had torn cloth from his own shirt and let him bind her wounds, had taken that gesture, that trembling, desperate attempt to save her, and turned it into something larger, something that bound them together even as she died. The bandage was proof that he'd tried, proof that she'd trusted him, proof that his hands, shaking and inadequate as they were, had held her life for a few precious moments. And when she'd given him the sword, in front of the children, witnessed in public and absolute, she'd completed the contract, his cloth for her steel, his effort for her legacy, his future bound to hers in blood and torn fabric. Mark lifted the sword, still too heavy, still impossible, but his hands were steadier now, his grip more sure. He would learn, would train until the blade felt like part of him, would teach the children to fight, to stand, to laugh at death the way Lyra had, would carry her memory forward wrapped in torn cloth and written in scars. I won't fail them, he whispered to the darkness. I promise. The sword gleamed in the dim light, the bandage wrapped around its grip a pale marker against dark steel. His cloth, her blood, their contract. He would honor it. 3 months later, Mark stood in the settlement's training yard watching Finn drill with a shortened blade. The boy was fast, learning quickly despite his size. Around him, other children practiced, older ones teaching younger, the way Sarah had started. Mark's wounds had healed into scars, white lines across his chest, a puckered mark on his side. He moved easier now, though pain still woke him some nights. The sword was strapped across his back, He'd modified the harness to fit better, adjusted the weight distribution. It was still impossibly heavy, but he'd grown stronger, learned to work with its momentum rather than against it. The bandage was still wrapped around the grip. Sarah had offered to replace it with fresh cloth, but Mark had refused. The blood-soaked fabric was part of it now, part of the weapon, part of the promise. Again, he called to Finn. Faster this time. Don't think. React. Finn moved through the drill, his small blade flashing. Better. Much better. A shadow fell across the yard. Administrator Erin, her face grim. Qatar Patrol, she said quietly. 5 kilometers out. Moving this way. Mark looked at the children. At Finn, barely 6 years old, holding a blade. At Sarah, 15 and already scarred. At 43 faces that had learned to fight because the alternative was death. How many? 20, maybe more. Can we evacuate? Not fast enough, and there's nowhere to run that they won't follow. Aaron met his eyes. We stand here, or we die running. Mark thought about Lyra, refusing to abandon her home. Thought about her laugh, defiant in stone chambers. Thought about the sword on his back and the bandage wrapped around its grip. We stand, he said. Aaron nodded. I'll spread the word. Everyone who can fight, we arm. Everyone who can't, we hide in the deep shelters. She left to organize the defense. Mark turned to the children. They'd stopped drilling, watching him with eyes that had seen too much. Listen to me, he said. All of you. Qatar are coming. We're going to fight them. Some of you are old enough to help. Most of you aren't. I can fight, Finn said immediately. No. You're going to the shelter with the others. But, no. Mark's voice was firm. Lyra died so you could live. I'm not throwing that away because you want to be brave. Finn's face crumpled. I want to help. You will. By surviving. By staying safe. Mark knelt down, eye level with the boy. Someone has to remember. Someone has to carry the stories forward. That's your job now. What's your job? Mark touched the sword on his back, felt the bandage wrapped around its grip. To make sure you get the chance to tell those stories. The Qatar came at dusk. 23 of them, moving in coordinated units, weapons ready. They'd learned from the refuge. No more rushing into tight spaces, no more giving their enemies advantage. The settlement's defenders were dug in. 40 fighters, most of them refugees with scavenged weapons and barely any training. Against them, professional Qatar soldiers with military-grade equipment. It should have been a massacre. Mark stood at the center of the defensive line, sword drawn. Around him, others held position. Aaron with a rifle, the Kasenth survivors with blades like his. Humans with whatever they could carry. The Qatar opened fire. Plasma rounds lit the dusk. Mark charged. The sword sang. 3 months of training, of learning to work with its weight, paid off. He met the first Qatar and cut it down. Spun and took another. The blade was part of him now, extension of muscle and bone. Around him the line held. Barely. The Qatar pushed hard, trying to break through, but the defenders had chosen their ground well. Narrow passages between structures, limited firing lanes. They made the enemy come at them piecemeal. Mark killed another Qatar. His arms were screaming, sweat running into his eyes, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind him, in the deep shelters, 43 children waited, trusted him to keep them safe. He thought about Lyra's laugh, let it echo in his mind as he swung the sword. The battle raged for an hour. When it ended, 12 Qatar lay dead. The rest had retreated, pulling back to regroup. The settlement had lost 6 fighters. Wounded numbered twice that. Mark stood in the aftermath, sword heavy in his hands, looking at the cost, at the bodies being carried away, at the blood soaking into dust. Erin approached, limping from a wound in her leg. They'll be back, with more. I know. We can't win this. Not here. Not like this. So what do? We do what your Lyra should have done. Erin's voice was tired. We run, evacuate, find somewhere defensible and regroup. Mark thought about the refuge, about Lyra refusing to abandon her home, about how that choice had killed her and nearly killed them all. You're right, he said. We move. Tomorrow, before they can bring reinforcements. The children. Come with us. All of them. He looked at the sword in his hands, at the bandage wrapped around its grip. Still there, still blood-soaked, still marking the contract between him and a woman who died laughing. Lyra made me promise to protect them. I won't let her down again. That night, Mark visited the shelters where the children had hidden during the fighting. They were shaken but unharmed. Finn ran to him immediately, grabbing his leg. "You're okay," the boy said. Relief flooded his voice. "I'm okay. We all are." Did we win? Mark thought about the question. About the dead, the wounded, the knowledge that more Qatar would come. "We survived," and he said, "That's what winning looks like now." Sarah approached, her makeshift sword still in her hand. "What happens next?" "We leave. Find somewhere safer. Somewhere we can actually defend. And then? Then we keep surviving. Keep fighting. Keep carrying forward what she gave us." Mark touched the sword on his back. "Until we find something worth more than just survival." Sarah nodded. She'd approve. Of the running part, I mean. Took her dying to teach you the lesson. Despite everything, Mark smiled. She always was a harsh teacher. They moved out at dawn. 200 people. Fighters, families, children. Everything they could carry loaded onto salvage vehicles and backs. Mark walked near the front, sword strapped across his back. The bandage around its grip caught the morning light, pale fabric marked dark with old blood. Finn walked beside him as always. The boy had appointed himself Mark's shadow, never more than a few steps away. "Where are we going?" Finn asked. "East. There's an old facility, pre-war, mostly intact. Aaron thinks we can fortify it." "Will we be safe there?" Mark thought about the question, about Lyra's laugh echoing through stone, about promises written in blood and torn cloth. "Safer," he said. "That's the best I can offer." "That's enough," Finn said, and meant it. They walked through the morning, 200 refugees seeking safety in a world that offered none. Behind them, the settlement burned. Aaron had given the order to destroy anything the Qatar could use. Scorched earth. Denial of resources. Mark looked back once, saw smoke rising against red sky, saw the place where he'd learned to fight, to lead, to carry forward the legacy of a woman who died trusting him. Then he turned east and kept walking. The sword was heavy on his back. The bandage wrapped around its grip was a constant reminder. Pale cloth marked with dark blood, proof of shaking hands and impossible trust. His cloth, her blood, their contract. He would honor it, would keep these children safe, would teach them to fight and survive and laugh at death when it came for them. Would carry Lyra's defiant laughter forward into whatever wars waited ahead. "Take my sword and never know death," the giantess had begged. He'd taken it. Her last breath had been a laugh, and Mark Rylance, traitor and coward and guardian, carried both forward. The sword and the laughter, and the blood-soaked promise wrapped around steel. Into the red dawn, into the future, into whatever came next.